Hello, and welcome to today's webcast, Automating Detection of Unknown Threats in Network Traffic, presented by Corelight and AlphaSOC. During today's webcast, we're going to talk about some common ways attackers obfuscate their network attacks to avoid detection, how deep network visibility and advanced analytics can catch these types of attacks, and how security teams can operationalize this insight and analytics to achieve faster workflows. Looking at the agenda, we'll start off with some introductions, then talk about some of the challenges associated with network visibility, followed by an overview of Corelight and AlphaSoC and how those solutions work together. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So if you do have any questions during the webinar, please enter them into the questions window and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. So let's kick things off with introductions. And Chris, if you'd like to go first.
Hey, good morning, Ed. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris McNabb. I am the co-founder of AlphaSoC. Historically, I've been working for 21 years now in the security industry, doing a lot of offensive, penetration testing, technical consulting work, and then in more recent years, I've become a lot more heavily involved in the defensive blue team side of things, helping security operations centers and teams, build out more sophisticated analytics capabilities.
Excellent. And hello, everyone. I'm Ed Smith. I'm Senior Product Marketing Manager at Corelight. I've been doing product marketing for technology companies for 10 plus years. Spent the last 7 years in the security space. Before that, I've had roles as systems engineer, professional consultant, tech support manager, and really excited to be here with Chris and everyone that's joined us. So thanks for joining us. Let's jump right in. So we'll begin with some discussion of some of the challenges that some of you in the audience might be facing today in your current environment with respect to network visibility and security. And one area we're going to hone in on is DNS. And Chris, maybe if you could talk about why DNS is such a critical piece of network security to get right.
Sure. So what we've found in recent years and recent times is that comfortably 98% of malware families and campaigns, whether they're phishing campaigns, spear phishing, watering hole attacks, so on and so on, if you were actually to retrospectively look back at them, you would find that the vast majority of them have DNS indicators or signals down on that layer within the network stack. So on this slide here on the right-hand side, you have some Department of Justice unsealed charges relating to a Chinese spear phishing and hacking campaign. And of course, 2 of the key TTPs were domain impersonation, so lookalike domains, and then dynamic DNS use, so registering kind of short-lived dynamic DNS domains as well. So across the board, whether it's malware, spear phishing, other types of attacks, we're seeing a lot of DNS telemetry that we can then use. So from a cost kind of perspective, it's a great place to start, right? So instead of thinking about, okay, I need to monitor all of the things, I need to be dropping in like PCAP, monitoring everywhere, looking at the entire 7-layer stack. If you just key in on DNS, DNS 98% of the time will give you a reliable indicator. So that's why DNS is important from a kind of detection and response perspective, and why we choose to use it day in, day out for the bulk of our kind of processing and alerting mechanisms. And on to the next slide, please, Ed. Thank you. So just to recap on some of the tricks that the bad guys use. As I mentioned on the previous slide, dynamic DNS domains are commonplace, along with these imposter lookalike domains. So here on the right-hand side of the slide, we have some APT28 domains that Microsoft seized a couple of years ago now. But in here, of course, we do have brand names. We have, Hudson.org, mysharepoint.com, office365-onedrive.com in particular. So within the AlphaSock stack, we'll get into this in later slides, but essentially we've built out classifiers that can programmatically and automatically identify these as interesting. The other challenge as well from a detection perspective is, or not even sophisticated actors. The majority of actors are going to set up new fresh infrastructure and new domains on a campaign by campaign basis. And so as defenders and blue team practitioners, we consistently have the problem of relying on threat feeds, and then if you're patient zero, or if you're unfortunate enough to be patient zero, then of course the indicator isn't yet on a threat feed. Or if you're looking for young domains and your newly observed domain feed only updates at midnight every day, and a domain is registered at 4 in the afternoon, you have hours of exposure by which you're maybe not flagging those domains. And again, we'll get into this later in the presentation.
Great. So taking kind of a closer look at some of the visibility challenges that we see, I think there's a couple of areas that our customers are facing. First is the availability of DNS records. So, having your DNS servers themselves, they have logging capabilities, but in some cases that logging may not be turned on. Maybe it was intentionally or unintentionally disabled. Sometimes logging on DNS gets disabled because it could affect the performance of the DNS servers themselves. So, in the interest of maintaining that, critical core network functionality that DNS provides, network teams may not turn on DNS logging. And then even if DNS logging is enabled, those logs may not be accessible to the security team. And we've seen several instances where that's been the case, where the security team doesn't have direct access to those logs. If they need access to those logs, oftentimes it's a manual request. Let's go over to the network team, request access to that data. So obviously not the most efficient way of getting that information. And in addition to that, even if you have that DNS logging available, it may not be centralized. You may end up needing to grab it from different sources, copy it, merge it together, correlate between the different sources. So it's pretty rare that we see good DNS logging capabilities all aggregated in a central place, like a SIM. So that's kind of the first challenge that we see, is just getting your hands on those DNS records in the first place. It can be pretty difficult. The next challenge, which is intrinsic to the nature of those DNS logs, is that there's really not a great deal of depth in those logs. Those logs are really, they're not designed for security use cases. They're, designed for performance monitoring and tuning of the DNS services themselves. So, with logging that was never really designed for security use. And in a few slides, I'll talk about what some of those details are and some of that depth that's missing, and we'll go into a specific example. But I'm guessing if you're someone that's listening to this and you've had to use those DNS records, you've probably encountered this pain point. You've probably encountered situations where you're looking at a DNS log, wishing that it contained additional information. What was the response for a particular query? Maybe you've found yourself questioning the accuracy of the timestamp on the log. Okay, was this really when that event happened? Another instance where we got to go back to the networking team, figure out, was that really the case? Is this really when this happened? So those are the types of frustrations that we hear commonly from our customers. And last, there's a challenge of accuracy. DNS servers can have all sorts of different misconfigurations, different problems. They can become overloaded. As I mentioned just a second ago, your timestamps, they can be off. So if you're trying to correlate your DNS logs against other logs, if there's any unsynchronized timestamps, that can be a huge issue. So, you can't always trust the accuracy of the records that you're getting, because sometimes, the servers that you're getting them from are faulty or misconfigured. And again, this can be especially frustrating when you don't have direct access to those servers to figure out, hey, what's really happening here. So from a visibility perspective, those are the three key challenges that our customers face with DNS logging. And Chris, maybe if I can hand it back over to you, if you could talk about some of the DNS security challenges for analysis.
Absolutely. So here on this slide, the first two bullets really key back to what Ed was talking about around challenges with aggregation and centralizing all of that content into one place, whether you use Elastic or Splunk or some kind of mechanism to get everything in one place for analysis and processing. Secondarily, a challenge or a problem or a gap that I've seen historically within security operations setups and teams is that if, let's say, you enable DNS query logging on your internal resolvers, your domain controllers, your name servers internally, you can, of course, still have clients within the environment that are using name servers that aren't those internal kind of official resolvers. Maybe they're using 8.8.8.8, or maybe they're using DNS over HTTPS or DNS over TLS, punching a hole straight out the firewall, on port 443 in particular. So there's also this school of thought around getting proper kind of telemetry from the wire and at the network layer itself, versus relying on logs coming from the servers, because a lot of setups that I've seen recently where teams are using DNS debug logging on their domain controllers, that's great so long as all of the clients within the environment are indeed using that infrastructure for resolution purposes, right? So that's one thing that's important to bear in mind if you want to really get an absolutely crystal clear picture of what's going on within an environment. This third bullet here talks about threat feeds and indicator lists and signature driven approaches. Within AlphaSock, we have there was a blog post we put together last year where we went back over, I think it was something like 16,000 indicators of compromise that we had loaded into our threat intelligence platform. And over a 90-day period, these tens of thousands of indicators only actually hit a small number of time within customer environments. And we were getting a much better result from doing, kind of automated processing of telemetry in real time. So there's certainly a kind of point at which indicators and threat feeds start to provide almost like a diminishing return. And I'm sure we're all aware that those tools are easily evaded. Where if you are, as I said on in a previous slide, if you are unfortunate enough to be patient zero, then the indicators aren't yet within the threat intelligence platforms, and they're not, those threats are then just not even appearing within your dashboarding if you're relying completely on indicator lists. The final thing to bear in mind from a security analysis challenge perspective is that this manual deep processing of DNS events can be slow and cost prohibitive. So if you do have, let's say, all of your DNS telemetry coming into Splunk, but you don't have any automated analytics, you then are looking to then hire threat hunting and SOC, tier 1, tier 2 analysts to then actually dig into that data manually on a day-by-day basis, running searches against the data set looking for young domains, running searches looking for perplexing domains, and we've found that a lot of teams are relying still quite heavily on people to run these searches and threat hunts using tools like Splunk and Elastic and these other, Sumo Logic and these other kind of SIM platforms. And so that really is the final challenge where, at the end of the day, networks and systems are becoming exponentially more complex. So in 3, 4, 5 years time, it just won't be feasible for us as an industry to be relying on human beings to do some of this heavy lifting. We're going to need to look at ways of automating and optimizing those processes.
Great. Thanks, Chris. And just a reminder to our attendees today, any questions that you have, feel free to enter those into the questions window, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation today. All right, so those are some of the challenges around network visibility and security with DNS in particular. So, the question is, how do we actually fix those problems? So let's take a look at how Corelight and AlphaSock with our integrated solution can address some of these challenges. So to recap, on the visibility side, we've got an accessibility problem, we've got a depth problem, and we've got an accuracy problem. On the analytics side, we have an analysis centralization problem, a one-dimensional analysis limitation, and that's limiting us in trying to catch some of these advanced attacks. And lastly, analysts are manually looking up DNS records, manually looking up those domain registrations, and these are key details that can help you uncover really advanced attacks, but they don't really scale very well. So if these are the challenges, how can Corelight and AlphaSock help you? So as far as availability and accessibility of those records, Corelight takes all of your raw traffic and we transform it into protocol-specific logs. And these logs are exceptionally rich, especially the DNS log. It's very rich, very detailed compared to a typical DNS server log. And we are centralizing this information, so it's all in one place. You can deploy our appliances, our virtual sensors, our cloud sensors, and we can deliver all of these logs into one place. And you can put those logs wherever you want. You can put them in your SIM, you can put them in your data lake, send them into an analytical tool like AlphaSock. So we give you all of the data that you need all in one place so that you can solve that key problem of visibility. The depth of these logs are much richer, and we'll take a closer look at that in a few slides. And from an accuracy perspective, Corelight does a lot of interesting things because we control the hardware and the software of our sensors. So that way, with that level of control, we can ensure that the logs are exceptionally accurate. So to give you an example, when we're measuring those timestamps, we are doing that at the NIC level itself. So the NIC within the Corelight sensor is how we're capturing that. So we can give you exceptionally detailed logs and very accurate timestamps. On the analytics side, it's hard to get all of the DNS stuff plus the other data sources, but it's important to get a full picture of what's going on in your environment. So with AlphaSock, plugs directly into your SIM or your data lake environment, and it's meant to operate in that centralized data environment. And from an analytics perspective, AlphaSock goes well beyond the simple IOC matching that you're going to get from blacklists, as Chris mentioned earlier. And there's some really sophisticated things that AlphaSock does in the background in an automated fashion, and that's really going to help you scale. Whether that's in an on-prem environment, a data center, or a cloud environment. So how does it deploy? Looking at this from a deployment perspective, first thing to understand here is that we're not an inline solution. Corelight is not sitting inline with your traffic. It's not a firewall in the way of your traffic where you need to worry about performance. So the Corelight sensors are out of band. We are agnostic, as far as where we get the raw traffic from. We just need to connect to some sort of infrastructure in your environment to mirror traffic for us, whether that's a network tap, a span port, or a packet broker. And then we take in that raw traffic and transform it into three key outputs. The first one are logs. These are protocol organized logs generated off of that raw traffic. Number two are security insights, and these are outputs of scripts that you can get from Corelight. So for example, we have a script on our sensor to analyze traffic to look for Bitcoin mining activity. Or another example, we recently released a package for detecting keystrokes within encrypted SSH connections. And then you can extend that yourself as well as creating your own scripts. And then so when those insights are generated, we can output them, append it to one of our logs to kind of notify you of that activity or those results. And then number three, lastly, we can extract files. So Corelight can extract, reassemble, dump files that we see going across your network into storage or file analysis framework, sandbox of your choice. So today's webcast, we really just wanted to focus on the log part and the logging capability, which is why you don't really see the insights and file extractions shown in this diagram. So you got your Corelight sensor. It's scalable. It's transforming your traffic into those rich logs, and you can send that into any SIM environment that you like. So this could be as far as AlphaSock, we can send this into an SFTP. We can send this into Splunk. We can send this data into S3 buckets, and we support Fortkin filtering. So you can send those into any or all of those locations. And then that's where AlphaSock can go in and start its analysis work. The Corelight sensors come with native export packages to make sure that all of those logs are delivered to those different services. We also have a web application. Very easy for you to configure our sensors. Literally within a matter of minutes, you can have Corelight up and running, exporting your logs to Splunk and go from there. Chris, is there anything else that you wanted to add on the deployment information?
Yeah, sure. So it's just, I suppose it's important to mention that, of course, Corelight connects Fort out to tons of different things, right? Like you have Elastic support and lots of other integrations that aren't on this diagram. The real point of the three integrations we have on this slide are that those are all plug and play ingest options. So literally, within 15-20 seconds of typing some config into the Corelight sensor or clicking around in the UI on the sensor itself, you can get the data exported, whether it's through SFTP, Amazon S3. If you just want to use those mechanisms, or if you have the material being indexed up into Splunk, we can then natively plug and play and pick up that data immediately without really any kind of complicated configuration. If a customer does have Elastic or other mechanisms, other SIMs that this is flowing into, maybe QRadar, Logarithm, Sumo Logic, we of course can also support those, but just for the purposes of this conversation with demonstrating how we have the plug and play integrations, this is how we would ideally set something up with a customer.
Excellent. Great. So let's take a few minutes to dig a bit deeper into Corelight's products and our technology. All right, who is Corelight? Well, we are a startup headquartered in San Francisco. Company was founded in 2013. And our sensors are based on an open source framework called Zeke, which was formerly called Bro. Zeke is a very mature open source framework. It has many years of development that have gone into it. And Zeke is really where Corelight's key transformative capabilities come from. And as I mentioned earlier, those capabilities break down into those three different areas as far as traffic logging, traffic analysis, and file extraction. So as I mentioned, Zeke is very mature. It's a very mature security framework, years of development behind it. It all started back in 1995 at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab when Vern Paxson, who is a co-founder of Corelight, wrote the initial version of Zeke. And Zeke's grown over the years. It started really gaining traction in higher education and government organizations. And more recently, we've seen an explosion of the use of Zeke in the enterprise. So, today we have thousands of organizations around the globe that are using Zeke to monitor their traffic, transform their raw traffic into usable security data and logs that they can then input into security analytics tools like AlphaSock, and that they can expose to their security analysts and their threat hunters to make their job easier, make things much more faster to make sense of their network, resolve incidents much faster, hunt threats faster and more effectively. And part of the reason we think Zeke's really taken off over the past couple of years is that now the enterprise is now facing the same level of threat sophistication that those governments and high-end research institutions were already facing. So now it's really kind of a global problem, and that's partly why we think we're seeing such broad adoption of Zeke. So Corelight, as a commercialized version of Zeke, offers 5 high-level benefits compared to that open source deployment of Zeke. So the first is time to deployment and time to value. So as powerful as Zeke is, it really can be quite tricky to deploy, configure, and tune it at scale, especially in medium to large environments. And we've seen it take, weeks, months, or even years for those large scale deployments, especially to stand up open source Zeke in a satisfactory manner. With Corelight, we're plug and play. You can unpackage our appliance, rack it, plug it in, set a few configs in the web app, and be off and running in a matter of minutes. And we've had customers that have been shocked by how easy it is to deploy. Just very easy to get Corelight up and running and get going with that data. Another benefit is performance. That really distinguishes us from the open source option. With open source Zeke, we've seen typically a peak around 3, 4, 5 gigabits per second per sensor. And with Corelight, we have a couple different sensor options, which I'll show you in a moment. And with our high-end sensor, we're capable of delivering, consuming up to 25 gigabits per second of analysis, or even more in certain environments, depending on the traffic mix. So with Corelight, you're really getting, up to 10 times performance gain per sensor. Number 3 are our enterprise integrations. Things that you would imagine and expect an enterprise solution to have, compared to an open source version. Things like, a web application user interface, integration with your favorite tools like AlphaSock and Splunk. All of those things are baked into our sensor, so you don't have to spend time tinkering with integrations or APIs, unless, of course, you would like to do that. And we do expose much of the data and configurability that we have via an API. Monitoring is another key area of differentiation, and that includes everything from monitoring the log volumes from what's happening on your network to monitoring packet loss. The reason that's important is that one of the common challenges with open source Zeke is packet loss. We had one customer using open source Zeke. They came to us and put one of our boxes in their environment and realized, hey, we're dropping over 30% of our traffic, but they didn't even have any visibility into that packet loss. So with Corelight, among these other monitoring capabilities, we give you a definitive measurement of packet loss, and that again, that's something we monitor and measure at the NIC itself. So it's very accurate, very comprehensive, very detailed monitoring information. And finally, overall ease of manageability and enterprise support. Support for open source Zeke, it really doesn't get any better than Corelight. And one of the advantages that we have as a company is that Vern Paxson, who I mentioned earlier, works for Corelight, along with some of the key open source contributors to Zeke. So hey, if you're looking for enterprise support, it doesn't really get much better than Corelight. Great, so let's take a quick look at the Corelight product line. And really, in summary, we have three form factors for our sensors. The first is a cloud sensor, which deploys into AWS or Azure. Number two, we have a virtual sensor, which supports VMware and Hyper-V. And number three is a family of physical appliances that are sized based on analysis throughput. So on the low end, we have the AP200, which is a 2 gigabits per second sensor, great for factory floors and remote offices. Virtual sensors also great for those remote locations. On the high end, we have the AP3000, which can do 25 gigabits per second and up, commonly used for high-end east-west traffic for large organizations that are transferring gigabytes or even petabytes of data. And then in the middle is our flagship product, the AP1001, which can handle 10 gigs of network traffic. All right, so why Corelight? Let me just quickly cover some of the additional value propositions that our customers tell us that they really appreciate. Network visibility. So we can help you enable faster, more effective incident response and threat hunting with better visibility. In fact, one of our customers improved their incident response time by a factor of 20, from hours down to minutes. And one of the ways that we help with this, which I'll show you in a second, is we make it really easy to pivot through these logs and quickly find the information that you need. So it's almost like we give you those the network cliff notes. So compared to something like PCAP, which takes up a whole lot of space, and unlike DNS logs on the other end of the spectrum, DNS logs, NetFlow, which don't really give you a high level of security detail. So Corelight is like the Goldilocks of network security data, sitting right in the middle, giving you just the right level of detail. And we deploy where you need us, whether that's cloud, that's virtual, it's on-prem. If you need us in your north-south connections, east-west, or high-value traffic areas, we make it easy to deploy and get visibility in those areas. So looking closer at our logging capabilities, Corelight generates 35 plus network logs. Since we have limited time today, we couldn't possibly go through all of them. So I'd like to take a look at 3 of them that I think are especially relevant for our discussion with AlphaSock today. So the log on the left, the con log, the connection log, is one of the master logs that we provide. So for every connection, the con log contains is generated, which is like this master log that's very similar to NetFlow. In fact, we sometimes call it NetFlow on steroids. And you can see just by looking at it that you're getting a lot of information, a lot more bits of information out of that connection log that you would compared to a typical NetFlow log. So with Corelight, Corelight is a connection-oriented logging tool. It focuses on connections, tracing, and reconstructing the narrative of how a connection happened, from, let's say, visiting a web page to downloading a file to attaching it to an email. So you can easily trace through all of that, trace that through the connection, easily understand what happened. So going to the log in the middle, this is HTTP log, useful for finding suspicious things like rare user agents, MIME types for comparison with, extensions of some, extracted files. Is there a mismatch there that could be suspicious? And then on the right, the DNS log. So as we talked about earlier, much richer, more detailed, much more details on DNS that you would get typically from your DNS server, assuming you have DNS logging enabled. So I wanted to dig into a quick example here. In the top, we have a sample Corelight DNS log. And on the bottom is a sample DNS server log that you might get from your DNS server. There's a few things I want to call attention to on this slide, and they are color-coded. So in the red, that's the NIC measured timestamp, accurate down to the microsecond, so very reliable. And with instant response, that's all about sequence and reconstructing how things happen. And so this timestamp is exceptionally important when you're going through the logs and trying to figure out what happened, because it allows you to confidently pair up the events based on these timestamps and understand the order of these events. In green, that's the connection unique identifier, which is also another thing that's going to differentiate a Corelight log from your typical DNS server log. So this is a unique feature of Zeke and Corelight. So for every connection, it's going to get stamped with that unique identifier. So that's important because it allows you to rapidly pivot from event to an event, all within a connection. Otherwise, if you don't have that identifier, you're manually trying to match up two different timestamps from two disparate log sources, and that takes time. It's manual. Can you even trust that the timestamp is accurate? It's coming from two different sources. And so the alternative to that is just use this connection identifier to rapidly pivot through your SIM, seeing everything that happened along the way during this connection. So file events, DNS events, HTTP events, it's all there within a few clicks just by pivoting on that connection ID. In purple is the content of the response itself. So, something that's typically missing in a DNS server log. And, from a security perspective, that is something that can be critically important. Part of that purple string is telling you that you can trust that response, because one DNS attack technique is to wipe the cache of what returns, so that when you go back to it, the attacker's already wiped evidence of what happened. You would have lost it, so you couldn't even see that piece of data. But with Corelight, we've captured it, and we've captured it in real time. Great. So a couple more things I wanted to mention on the Corelight logs. They're interlinked. That enables the pivoting functionality. And in purple, the timestamps connections at the top of the logs, that's the timestamp highlighting, so you can quickly pivot from log to log based on those timestamps. In the blue, the next row down, that's the connection ID, which I mentioned. You can use that to pivot across these different logs. So, if we kind of look at the big picture here, going left to right, you can see that a connection was established, a DNS query was triggered, and then an HTTP event occurred, and that resulted in the file download, and then that file was attached to an email. So, this is just an example of a sequence of events that, just in under a minute, just by following these connections, you can kind of understand what happened, all in front of you within your SIM. So something that's really not possible without a solution like Corelight. Otherwise, you'd be piecing together information from your NetFlow records, going and bugging your network team for the DNS logs, going to your Windows admins, asking for their logs. So it can be quite a mess and take hours of manual time and effort to reconstruct this narrative. That's quite simple in reality, but quite difficult to discern without this rich data that Corelight provides. Great. So with that, I'm going to pass the ball back to Chris, who's going to tell us a little bit more about AlphaSock.
Awesome. Thank you, Ed. So we were also founded in 2013, headquartered here in the beautiful city of San Francisco. Really, our business is that of processing network telemetry to identify both known and unknown emerging threats. So we do, of course, perform basic one-dimensional correlation where we have, threat feeds and indicators and various sources that we use to flag, Tor traffic and crypto mining and other known categories. But more importantly, we then build on that through the classification work that I'll talk about in the upcoming slides to identify unknown emerging threats based on combinations of these weaker signals that we're able to then throw together and generate kind of high fidelity, high utility alerts. So at its very core, we operate what's called the AlphaSock analytics engine, which is a piece of software that can either run on-prem if you want to deploy it internally and locally to a business or organization. But the majority of our customers, comfortably 90% of them, use our cloud service. So from an architectural perspective, the way that would work is, talking within this conversation with Corelight, you would have your raw telemetry, as Ed has been describing, DNS.log, con.log, http.log, SSL.log. These are the raw telemetry types. You would have those flowing up into Splunk or Elastic or being sent to our engine directly through Amazon S3 or SFTP. We then perform all that heavy lifting and multi-dimensional processing, and then the alerts will make their way back down into Splunk or Elastic, or we have a web console, or you can peel them off in CEF or JSON format and ship them over syslog into your SIM. There are lots of different ways of then rendering the alerts as well. So on this slide, the final thing to mention then is as I just said, we pick up and we like to process and see DNS.log, con.log, http.log, and SSL.log. That then allows us to flag threats across different layers. So on the IP layer, we can then flag, ICMP tunneling or Tor traffic. On the DNS layer, we can flag traffic to maybe a suspicious young domain that we haven't seen before or is unique to a customer environment. On the HTTP layer, we can look for weird user agents or content types. So, across these layers, we get a very good idea of what's going on, and then more importantly, provide security teams with kind of actionable alerts. If we can jump on to the next slide, please, Ed. Or do I? One second. Okay, I see it. Sorry. So why AlphaSock? As I just mentioned on the previous slide, we're performing deep processing and alerting. Now, earlier in the call, I mentioned the cost associated with manually, frankly, hiring people to sit in front of Splunk and Kibana dashboards and your SIM, digging around for things in an inefficient way. We really the whole drive and the point of what we have been doing with hundreds of security teams around the world now is to automate and optimize So the engine processes just over 4 billion, the cloud instance of the engine processes just over 4 billion events daily. It's running at scale. And the depth of that processing means that we can uncover, unknown emerging threats, and also the fidelity and the utility of those alerts, more importantly, is high. So when we do generate a refined alert saying, look, we're seeing multiple requests to long host names indicating DNS tunneling, the fidelity and utility of that alert is sufficiently high for a security team to then, triage it in a quick and efficient manner. Moving on. Just digging in here into the challenges around one-dimensional processing. So if you are relying on threat feeds, there are 6 threats here, but there are also other threats that simply cannot be identified with just one-dimensional correlation. So if you have, let's say, an infected system using a domain generation or fast flux algorithm, if those DGA domains aren't on a threat feed, then your SIM and your kind of SOC will be largely blind to that content. Also, if you're a victim of exfiltration through DNS tunneling or ICMP tunneling, again, those domain names and those IP addresses likely aren't on any threat feeds, and you would need to adopt deeper processing and analytics to kind of uncover those threats and pull out those needles from the haystack. We see an increasing amount of Unicode homoglyph attacks, imposter domain attacks, which are difficult to identify, if not impossible, if these are custom domains that have been set up to attack your organization on that given day. As I mentioned before, dynamic DNS, malicious VPS provider traffic is tricky to flag, and so on and so on. And the list frankly goes on beyond these 6. And there are a number of known challenges. I'm sure a lot of you that are on the call are aware around, false positive rates, fidelity, utility, all kinds of challenges around getting meaningful signals and threats out of the raw data, ideally without having to hire too many analysts to manually dig into the material. So at AlphaSock, we perform multi-dimensional processing using the analytics engine. And the simple way of thinking about this is that we're simply automating the vast majority of steps that an experienced analyst would otherwise perform manually. So we are whoising every domain that we see within a customer environment. We're looking up all those destinations, whether it's a DNS destination or an IP destination or an HTTP destination. We're looking those up within sandboxing engines, VirusTotal, and other APIs. And really, we're going beyond this even further with then deep machine learning and classification, and most importantly, this work we're performing in a few seconds using the analytics stack. In terms of the classifiers themselves and the layers of classification, when we talk about multi-dimensional processing, the first dimension is then temporal, where we're looking for beaconing behavior and spikes and quantitative changes in traffic volume. The second layer is then along the lines of feature-based analytics. So we can look for perplexing labels and perform like Shannon entropy calculations on domain values to figure out whether they're machine generated or whether they look like regular English words. We're able to also then look for brand names within domain names, long host names, and other features. We use, as I mentioned, third-party APIs to provide context. So who is output, VirusTotal output, all kinds of other, Google Safe Browsing, WebRisk, and all these other APIs that we're interacting with actively on the fly. And then finally, we perform active fingerprinting, where we have worker processes within the engine on the cloud side, where we are actively fingerprinting destinations to try and figure out whether that machine is running WordPress, whether it's running a crypto mining service on port 77777 or whatever we see. And we can also then flag open directory listings and other features as well. And on the next slide, I think we can then dig into some of those. So here we have a screenshot output from our Splunk app. and this is then providing a high severity alert to a security team relating to this console.amazon.aws.ec2.net domain that we see within this environment. So here you can see on the right-hand side, we have various flags being attached to that destination. So through the Whois classification, we then automatically flag this domain as being young. We have a unique classifier by which we can track whether destinations are unique to an AlphaSock customer environment. So if we see traffic within one environment that we don't see anywhere else, we will then flag that as unique and then highlight that to the security team. And then the imposter flag just indicates that this Amazon AWS label is being seen within a larger domain, and it's not a legitimate Amazon domain. It's not using their name servers or registered to them through Whois. So we can then flag this as, as unique traffic to a young domain that's impersonating console.amazon.aws. Which the team might want to take a look at. And again, we're doing that all automatically through the analytics engine and the stack itself. Let's move on. And then a second example here is of that active fingerprinting capability we have. So in this case, we have traffic to a domain within a weird TLD. This .cf is marked as a bad TLD within the stack. We have the beacon flag indicating that the timing deltas between the requests are falling into a regular pattern. The engine has recognized that this label is a perplexing domain and it doesn't look like it's a regular kind of English word. And then finally, the system is running WordPress. So again, these are things that traditionally a SOC analyst would maybe manually figure out and kind of correlate themselves slowly but surely, kind of in a manual, inefficient way. And within the engine and the capability that we offer here and the hookup with Corelight, we're able to instantly take the telemetry, process it within a few seconds through the engine, and then give the security team meaningful and kind of accurate insights. Here's just a brief list of some of our use cases. So we can flag things like, DNS and ICMP tunneling and exfil, traffic to young domains that are unique to your environment that might be of interest to the security team, traffic to dynamic DNS destinations, and then we can also do clustering analytics where maybe we see an IP lookup event to what's my IP address.com, and then we see traffic to maybe a storage medium like OneDrive, and then we see traffic to a dynamic DNS domain or maybe a young domain with weird properties. If we see that kind of combination or cluster of events within, let's say, a 5-minute period, we can then flag that as a high severity, weird combination of weak signals that likely indicate compromise as well. So we're able to pull together, all of these weak signals, and if we see a sufficient number of them in a sufficient order, or we see a cluster of strange events from a system, we're able to then highlight that system for triage and investigation. Here's a quick live detection example from within a customer environment recently. So here we see this Microsoft.com with a Z and some T's. The engine automatically flags it with an open directory listing flag. The sandbox flag indicates it's hitting on virus total. The young domain flag means it was registered less than 60 days ago, and then the engine thinks it's an imposter of Microsoft, which it is. If you manually were to look at that domain through a browser, you would find these various phishing kits and a malware executor or malware dropper files. So this is just a clear kind of live example of the engine in action and the kind of stuff it will highlight and flag. And I know we're running up against it time-wise, so I'm just going to rifle through these next ones pretty quickly. Here are some other live campaign detection examples. We're able to, at the end of the day, to cut a long story short, we're able to flag active campaigns and emerging threats without using threat feeds. So it solves this patient zero problem and provides kind of meaningful alerts to your team. And then let's go on to the next one, please, Ed. We've mentioned the plug and play integration. So if you're looking at Corelight from a POC perspective, or if you're an existing user, you can hook up Corelight to the AlphaSock analytics engine in a few minutes using SFTP, S3, or Splunk. Those are our preferred mechanisms. And then let's just go into the next slide. where I have some further screenshots of the alerts and the way that we render the material. So this then is output from our Splunk app, which is free to download and evaluate for 30 days without any restriction. And in here, you can see, the kind of the prioritized list of alerts at the top. We have some C2 traffic, some HTTP GET requests to a bad destination, some Tor traffic, crypto mining, and so on and so on. So this hopefully just gives you a high level understanding of the kind of quality of the alerts and the way that we render the material. And then let's go 2 more slides down, please, and we'll go 1 more to the Cloud Console. We also then have console.alphasock.net, so you don't need Splunk in order to render these alerts. You could go from the Corelight sensor up to the engine using Amazon S3 or SFTP directly from the sensor, ship the telemetry to us. We will then process it, and we can then render the alerts through the console as well. So hopefully, I know that was brief, but hopefully that gives you an understanding of some of the more kind of sophisticated and advanced problems that we've been able to solve here at AlphaSock. And if you do get an opportunity to look at the Splunk app, yeah, it's free to use for 30 days, and I'd love to get your feedback.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. So I think we only have time for a couple questions in our Q&A, but if you have any questions, please enter them into the questions window, and we will follow up offline if we run out of time. So first question, assuming a company policy of encrypt everything, how does this work? Is man in the middle and decrypting all traffic requirement for achieving the logs 34 plus protocols? Great question. Thank you for asking that. So decryption is an option, of course, but it needs to be managed through a separate technology vendor, such as a packet broker. So decryption is not something that Corelight does, but we can take in decrypted traffic. Another thing to keep in mind is that Corelight and Zeke generate encrypted traffic logs for SSL, TLS, SSH, Kerberos, and other encrypted traffic logs. So there is still visibility when traffic is encrypted, and that's related to the nature of the connection, handshake, certificate details. We can do things like J3 fingerprinting of SSL connections. Great, so moving on, I think we just have time for 1 more question. Am I to understand this is real hardware, not anything IaaS, VMware, KVM deployable? And I think we may have addressed this right after this question came in. So in addition to the hardware solutions, we do have the virtual and cloud sensors that are available. Virtual sensors work with VMware and Hyper-V. Excellent. So apologies if we ran out of time to address your questions. We will follow up with you offline. And just before we end and wrap up here, wanted to mention how to schedule a demo. If you visit AlphaSock's website, you can request a demo. If you're interested in learning more about Corelight or seeing a demo, reach out to us at info@corelight.com. Great. So I wanted to thank Chris for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to present with me today, and as well as everyone who attended. Thanks for attending. And we have recorded this presentation, so it will be available for you to review or send to a colleague. So thanks again for attending, and have a great day.